There we go. All right, we're live. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the test drive first episode, whatever we want to call it, of the Python community news. I'm Jay and John. You're there too.
I'm John.
Yeah, we're still figuring it all out. Like it's fun, but yeah, this is a conversation around things that have been happening in the last week in the Python community. And we're not going to be really covering anything that you install with pip install. We're going to be talking about things that will affect you maybe in your day job, maybe in your job hunt, maybe in your CFP processing and all the other things. And John, you want to just jump right in with the Heroku story?
Yeah, so I have a couple items I added this week, but that first one is the Heroku story, which is that Heroku's ending its free tier. So this means that if you're a current Heroku customer, you've got some projects running on their free tier. Those are going to be discontinued, and if you haven't been an active Heroku user in a while, your account's going to be deactivated as well. So this is pretty relevant because there are a lot of people that host really small applications on Heroku. Personally, I've done this for a bunch of different reasons, and they're often used for things like I need a registration page to um, you know let someone sign up for my Slack chat or my Discord chat. Those sorts of things where we're doing a pretty small application needs to do a little bit of dynamic work, but so it can't just be like a static page, but doesn't need maybe to exist year round or doesn't need uh, a large scale deployment. And so this is going to impact a lot of people. And this isn't the first time things like this have happened, right? I think the broader conversation around this is basically that uh, a lot of open source and community run projects rely on free offerings from companies like Heroku, various other hosts in the past, and there end up being these announcements where someone says, "Well, this isn't profitable for us anymore," and now the community at large, right, figures out, what are we doing? Are we migrating? Are we paying? And then they uh, kind of find some other solution for a few years maybe, and the cycle repeats.
The thing about this that gets me is like this gives me that same vibe that like the Docker licensing thing had, where folks were like, it's a money grab. Like they're tired of people using this stuff for free, and it's like I don't think that anyone's tired. I think it's like business propositions. Do you know if like Heroku's a public is are they a public company or?
So Heroku is owned by Salesforce.
Oh, I
Um,
mean,
in
well,
Yeah, so there's a different version of this announcement somewhere, that has the logos side by side, makes
yeah,
that a little more clear. But
I do see it at the top there now on the blog, like Salesforce
yeah,
developers Heroku, like, but yeah, like this idea of like companies having to figure out what are they doing to keep their margins, narrow enough that they're not making too much money, but they're also not like losing too much money. And then like on top of that, you also have that concept of this could mean something else. Like we're only seeing a part of it. Like we're seeing the part that everyone's kind of upset about, but I wonder, like Salesforce buys companies all the time. I wonder if there is something else about to happen that's like, okay, no, if you want to do those free things, do those small things, you go do that over here. But in order to do that, we have to kind of clean house a bit. And maybe that's what this announcement is saying of like, okay, hey, obviously Salesforce doesn't want everybody using Heroku on the free tier, and we might need to be getting, cleaning up some storage, just things that have sat there and haven't been touched in years. Like I'll admit, I got projects that I haven't touched that are on Heroku, and I think I got some notifications in my email of like, hey, update to terms of service. These are gonna go away, and I was kind of like, eh, and just like let them go. It's fine. But I feel like we're latching on to kind of the. I mean, we're latching on to what we have, but I don't know if this is like the entire story. And I also think that this is it's definitely not like a hey, if you want to keep using the service, pay up. I think there's like another thing that's going to drop soon.
Yeah, I don't. I have no knowledge of any future announcements out of this, but I think we saw a pretty similar situation. What was it? Just a few weeks ago, right? Where GitLab was going to be uh, retiring, deleting whatever terminology they used, old so-called unmaintained projects,
Yeah.
right? And so they were going to be for the free tier specifically, not for the paid tiers. So it's a similar conversation, and I think a lot of it comes around to right. This stuff costs money at the end of the day, right? Somebody is going to be paying for that, and uh, it's it puts people in it puts everybody in kind of a difficult position, right? As you mentioned, uh, the companies have to make it work with their financials, but then you've got projects that are volunteer projects, or projects that are maybe somebody's side project that they aren't really looking to make money with to begin with, and now suddenly they find themselves in this position of I'm going to drop everything I'm doing, figure out where to migrate to, put that effort in,
Mm-hmm.
and right, that has a cost as well.
Yeah. I wonder, thinking about like you just said, the fact that there are two free tiers that kind of just got chopped, and the disclosure on this is like I work for a competitor. Microsoft has services that can compete with this, but like I notice when we have downtime too, and like they do like a priority based thing where like okay, hey, if you're on this service, we have to deprioritize you for the like people that pay for guaranteed uptime and guaranteed service level agreements. And like I wonder if this is all related to that and things like I don't feel like they can ever decide if it's a chip shortage or a chip surplus or surge or like whatever they want to call it, but like ultimately the problem I feel is like we're in a period of time where we can't just buy more hard drives. We can't buy more storage necessarily just like that. It's not like, oh, all of a sudden Salesforce needs to buy 15 petabytes, put that in a server center, a data center somewhere, and then now all of a sudden there's just more space for free tiers to live on. That's just not the current landscape. So I wonder if this is a way of saying like we have to guarantee a certain level of service to the people who are paying customers, and that has to come at the sacrifice of the people who aren't necessarily paying.
Yeah, and as you said, there may be some future announcements coming. We'll see where things go with this. Time will tell. With the GitLab change in particular, they essentially about faced on that. Kind of the It wasn't the next day; it was soon after.
That's
Um,
because money started disappearing. Like
yeah, and
bad news is bad news.
we'll find out. What happens. Uh, if anything does come to replace this, at Heroku, or if people just migrate away. I'm sure there will be some people that pay up for it just because they say, well, it's not worth my time or energy to figure out a different hosting solution.
Yeah.
But there are going to definitely be those projects that go from okay, well, this is something that I spend my free time on, and already pay whatever expenses I have out of pocket, and it's not going to bring me any money in. So eventually, right, somebody's going to say, well, uh, I've got to cut my own, personal costs on these things and uh, prioritize something, and that might be their hosting. So people have obviously been talking about this on Twitter and elsewhere quite a bit. Other other hosting platforms have been mentioned as pretty good alternatives if people want to migrate. Um, but yeah, just if you haven't seen this news and you have a Heroku account, one, check your email because I believe everybody affected uh, got emailed about this. If you saw an email and just assumed it was a terms of service update, um, read that a little more carefully. Um, and yeah, I mostly wanted to share this because I do know a number of people um, who host kind of small projects on here that they might not realize are gonna at some point soon get turned off.
Yeah, and you know, I think that we've kind of hit this, and like I said, it's this is happening a lot, and I think that as if we start seeing other companies doing the same thing, I definitely want to cover those as well. But if you're one of the people watching now or watching later, and you're like I don't have time to watch all of this, well, good news for you. We actually have a newsletter that's going to be showing this information as well. And you can check that out on the link on the screen now, button down.email/ Python community news there. Let's transition over to the next story, which was
Uh,
interesting. Oh,
yeah, I was gonna say you brought this one up. Um, uh,
yeah.
what what's this report saying here?
I feel personally attacked by this one, honestly. For those that don't know, I wasn't always in tech. I used to be like an IT admin. And I remember having a manager that just didn't believe that Python was a big deal, and they really were like, "Oh, you should learn C or C++." Apparently, that's still happening. Like this is still the same thing. So, a recent IEEE Spectrum poll came out with Python being on top, but employers not valuing it as much as some other roles. And as we can see here, in terms of like the top programming languages, and I'm not sure how they configured this data. This is just another survey. This is a hearts and minds poll, I guess. But Python's definitely, we've seen this repeated time and time again in the last few years. It's being taught more in schools. It's like the number one language on the planet and things like that. But I know plenty of people looking for a job. And when you're looking for a job, like on the job skills, Python ranks third after SQL and Java. And I just wanted to talk with you about that to see, like, is this something that you've also seen, heard, had people talk about? Like,
Yeah, I mean, so the sequel thing. I think there are a few layers to this question.
yeah,
The sequel one is pretty much uh, that right. I don't know that this is just the language, right? It's also um, the additional tooling, the SQL servers themselves, right? So it's um, I didn't participate in this poll, but uh, you know, it's pretty tough to say, right? Suppose you're a web developer, right, and you're working on a Django project or a Flask project, something like that.
yeah,
You're probably using both Python and SQL, right? A lot of the time, and if it's not SQL, right, one way or another, you're storing data, and decoupling those two things is not necessarily difficult, but not wise either, right? They're going to go hand in hand when you're doing like web development or maybe data engineering, data analysis work.
Yeah.
So to say, Python and SQL are competing with each other, um, is a bit of a stretch to me. I think they're going to often go hand in hand, and typically, it's really going to depend on what your context is here, right? If this is a job search, what kind of roles are you applying for? SQL may be more important. Python might be. Python's probably going to apply to a bunch of things that SQL doesn't, and vice versa. So it's really hard to say, like, okay, well, I'm looking at this report and I see that jobs want SQL skills, so I'm going to go learn SQL instead of Python. Um,
Yeah. I
those
don't
are.
think that anyone is suggesting that. The thing that got me with this though is modern day Python thinks about that. It thinks about SQL. Like, I mean, I'm not saying that everything can be solved with an ORM, but like one of the first things that a lot of people do when it comes to building any type of application is how do I obfuscate the SQL kind of a way, and how do I approach SQL from at least in Python from a Pythonic lens, which is using SQL Alchemy or Django's ORM and things like that. Like you still have to know some SQL and you have to understand like the basics of SQL. You have to understand like joins and things like that. But ultimately, like if they're saying we would rather SQL query than like Python, then I feel like that's kind of mistaken. And I also I kind of wanted to focus on Java because I feel like Java's like the thing that has so much legacy that it's like it's modern, but it's also like it ran the web for so long outside of like JavaScript doing things that like people you just have to know it, or you have to be able to take something from Java and like migrate it.
I mean, not necessarily migrate it, right?
Yeah,
Java's still very relevant,
right, right.
and I imagine it will continue to be for quite some time. Um, my kind of go-to reference point for this kind of thing now is, right. A couple of years ago, all of these unemployment insurance systems that were written in COBOL suddenly needed people to maintain and upgrade them,
I
right?
wonder where that is on this list.
I mean, it's probably low. I don't think it's a trendy language, but um, you know, uh, Java, right? Even if it is fallen out of fashion in some areas, um, still a lot of stuff is going to run on it. And I mean, Python's the same way.
Yeah,
Python's what, 30 years old, ballpark.
don't make me feel old.
Um, right. So there are tons and tons of Python systems that are still running on Python 2 and will for the foreseeable future, right?
mm,
And these are going to be pretty relevant in the same way of things like, it's not as much of a jump to go from Python 3 to Python 2 as it is to go from Python 3 to COBOL.
yeah.
But you know, we when we go to, right, conferences and meetups and all of these other uh, kind of community events that are focused around languages, we tend to discuss, right, what's new in Python 3.11, and um, this feature or library that got added to a particular version of Java, right? Um, that's not the day to day for a lot of companies that are like deploying this stuff to keep it running, right? It's uh, there are often people who want to stay up to date and on the latest versions of everything, but um, there will certainly be legacy code everywhere, right?
Yeah, and I didn't think about it from the perspective of like just thinking about the even like the Python 2 to Python 3 aspect of things. Like I think that the most important things are the things that have still yet to be to be migrated after, a few years. That tends to be how it works. You don't like, oh, we need to migrate everything over today. Like you're not starting with the thing that if it breaks, you start immediately losing dollars. Like that's the stuff you move last. You double, triple, quadruple check all that stuff. You test it. You test it again, and then you finally move it over. And I mean, coming from a military background, I understand. Like when they shuttered Windows 95, Windows XP, it's public knowledge that the Navy was like, how much do we have to pay, to keep the most crucial systems running? And that's where a lot of these COBOL, you're talking about COBOL and like. I don't want to say Pearl. Pearl's not that old either. I know there are updates to it, but like COBOL and things like that, it's because they're important and they work and they don't want them to ever not work. So it's like we either don't want to spend the money to guarantee that it will always work no matter what language it's in, or we want to find people that can continue to work on projects but also have this other experience. And I wonder if that's where, going back to SQL being on, being number one on the list, ORMs are great. Django's great. Flask, I forgot it was like Flask SQL Alchemy and things like that. Those are all fine. But what happens when those things fall out of favor? When something like a fast API comes in and you're like, oh, now we need to migrate everything from Django to fast API for whatever reason. It's not saying you should, just saying that like these are things that happen. It's better to have an understanding of like those underlying technologies other than like, oh, I just use, you know Django ORM and I don't know anything about SQL Alchemy. I don't know anything about like the underpinnings of it, which are just SQL query.
Sure, and I mean that's why I said earlier that these are going to go hand in hand, right? It's uh, saying I'm going to use SQL instead of Python in my uh, web application that uses both of those things um, i- is is going to paint yourself into a corner, right? And so I agree that those ORMs and SQL support libraries are great. I've been using them for uh, pretty much my entire web development career, and uh, I've never regretted learning more about right the SQL behind uh, the queries that they generate, or about the Python internals of them, right? Because they're that's always going to be relevant um, to your work when you're working in those sorts of systems, and especially especially once you get past right the quick start tutorial, right? It's really easy to start out with this um, very very simple quick start and say, okay, well, I'm never going to have to write SQL because look what the ORM's doing for me. But what you're gonna get into situations where right you need to know the behavior you want um, before you where to look in the ORM even, because a lot of the stuff maps pretty one to one.
I totally agree with you. One question before we move on. I see the JavaScript in jobs falling under Python. Obviously, the entire world's using PyScript now. That's no. I'm kidding. Like, please do not use it, but don't use it for everything. Like, it has its things. But like, what are we seeing here? Is this, or do you think that this is like? I think you mentioned it before. Like, not everything is a web application, so you kind of need people who aren't serving things on the web. And I know that Java, before people yell at me, I know JavaScript can be used on the back end. I'm just saying that like most of its use is on the front end or used to serve applications. Python, I'm surprised like Go is so low where Go was growing. I mean, there I don't see Rust on here at all, which is interesting because I can't not see Rust anywhere else. But like, what do you see with like things like JavaScript, C Sharp, C++ kind of falling underneath Python? Do you have a thought or an opinion on that?
I mean, it's you know, like you said earlier, this is a hearts and minds poll, right? So it's hard to necessarily quantify all of that. But yeah, I mean, there are places where Python's going to be used that that JavaScript isn't, and vice versa. Um, and it also depends on how you're measuring it too, right? If I'm using right a a tool that's written in Python because I'm running Linux, right, and there's a bunch of right, OS related tooling that's built out in Python. Um, does that count here? If I'm using say a CSS post processor that's built in JavaScript, does that count for JavaScript even if I never touched JavaScript directly outside of running like a config file? Um, uh, you know, th- these are all very widespread languages. Um, I don't know that there's a ton of conclusions I would draw from any particular shift in um, kind of Python gained a position or lost a position. It's not going to be uh, none of this is going to be definitive. It's going to change all the time. So you've got to really um, probably the more interesting things are right when uh, for example, Rust enters this chart, right? That then you might be able to say, well, like, okay, this is a an up and coming thing that right people are really hiring for, right? It's more than just rounding error, and it's becoming like a core skill set, right? Because even in places where companies where you might use a dozen different programming languages, you may not list those as like job requirements, right? It might be, okay, well, we have this big Python backend and we're writing some stuff in Rust and Go. Uh, but right, first and foremost, you need the background necessary in order to maintain what's there. And the new stuff is a bonus.
Okay, okay, I feel you. Uh, so, folks, you may be wondering why, as we transition into the next topic, you might be wondering why we're not covering that thing that you just heard about. And that's because we didn't have it on our list. And did, did you know that you could actually add things to that list? And you can do so by heading over to the repo, which is github.com/KJY Miller. That's me. Python community news. You can add an issue there, add the topics that you want talked about on this show. And we're going to migrate into the next story. I know John is there. You go. He's back. He's back now. Um, this one I actually don't have a link for, so it's gonna be us. But I saw some stuff happen. Yeah, this past week we had Kiwi Pie, or was it Kiwi Pie? The conference in Aotearoa or New Zealand, and I was surprised to start seeing tweets yesterday that videos were available on YouTube for people to watch. And uh, Kiwi Pie is back in person, but they also were doing kind of a unique online, like virtual ticket where you could get Kiwi Pie, but you could also get, um, was it Pi APAC, PyCon APAC? And one of the things that we've talked about, John, and we also talk about in our monthly chats that we do in Discord, which point of order, I should probably get something for that in here too, like a link to the to Discord where you can talk with us and other people, and we talk monthly for much longer than we do on this show, and much deeper even. But we've talked about this before of like the value proposition of virtual conferences, not necessarily how they position themselves to advertisers in this case or sponsors, but how they like are valued for attendees. And my concern here is if a conference is putting out their videos virtually, like on YouTube or wherever where you can access it for free, 24 hours after the conference, what's the point in buying the virtual pass? And I know that you've got some opinions as the person who has put on virtual events as well as has a good history of doing conferences both in person and virtual.
Yeah, I mean, I think this starts off with, uh, your opinion as an attendee, right? Did you attend?
I didn't attend. I actually forgot that. Obviously, I'm not going to New
Or,
Zealand, so like,
uh, yeah, well, I guess the more specific question there is, did you choose not to attend because you knew the videos were coming out in 24 hours after the event?
so I didn't know that the videos were going to be going out. And by the way, shout out to the company that does this next day video. Like they're great. I've worked with them in the past. This isn't a knock on like their efficiency because it's stellar. Like this is amazing. I I personally didn't attend one because of like time zone stuff. Like obviously their conference is beginning as my work day is ending, and I have a choice that I can make there if I can sit at my desk longer or I can go spend time with my family, and I just chose the latter in this case. But I also think that even if this were a conference, in America, where I live, if it were virtual, if it were virtual only, the first thing I would think about is what is their history of releasing videos. I know like Pi Cascades does something similar where like they live stream the conference, and like it's available to view. Like when it was in person, it was available to view via live stream for free. Like you could just go on YouTube, go to their channel, and like watch the conference. And I know that in person, to me, I don't even go to the conferences for the talks because I know that they will be on YouTube later. I go for, getting to see my friends, getting to go to like the open spaces, which usually aren't recorded, and then getting to like interact with vendors and new and more experienced people in the Python community. So like for me, going to a conference is already so little about the talks. But when it's a virtual event, I don't know, like that's all I'm going for is to listen to the talks, because I'm not like I'm not gonna sit in the Discord like and just sit there and chat away. And some people do, and some people network, and some people do things. But I think the majority of people attending virtual events are, if they're watching it virtual, they're there for the talks.
Yeah, I don't know that I could make that logical jump of, right. That's what the majority is doing. I think similar to you, uh, I go to a conference for a lot more than just the talks. Um, and I'll co- you know add some context here. This isn't a new conversation, right?
No,
There have always been events that have had live streams. There have always been events that uh, release talk videos, very quickly. One day, sometimes same day. Um, where, right, the talk ended, and right by the time the next time slot is done, the video's already up on YouTube.
yeah,
Um, but I think, and this is going to depend on every individual attendee. But for me, it's about participation within a community, and that's more than just attending a talk. Right, attending talks is great. There are I've certainly been at events where I've overdone it, and attended too many talks to the point where By the time I get to one of the ones that I really want to see at the end of the day, I can't really think straight anymore. But um, there's a lot more involved there, and it's easy to see how that is not uh, how that's easier at an in-person conference, right?
Yeah.
So if you've got an in-person conference where um, you are right, you're getting on a plane the day before the event, and you're going to go and be around nobody but those conference attendees for say 3 4 straight days. Right, it's easy to immerse yourself in that, and I think the biggest that's probably the biggest disconnect here is right. Am I going to make that same level of effort um, to really participate in a virtual or a hybrid event? Right. Uh, Not everybody will. Some absolutely do. But it's certainly. I think with the rise in popularity of virtual events, you've gotten this world of people have taken to doing things like I'll put the conference on while I'm doing stuff around the house or kind of in between my other meetings. And I think one that's great if if that's reaching people who previously couldn't make time to attend a conference or for whatever other reason, right? This becomes an opportunity for them to really participate when they couldn't before. I am 100% all for that. Um, but if it's this the kind of flip side of that coin, if it's things like, well, there's this conference going on, and oh, it's just a virtual conference, so I'm not going to take the day off, right? I'm not gonna log out of Slack. I'm gonna have the videos on, but do my normal work anyway. Um, no, I think that's where some folks find that they don't get back out of the conference experience. Um, anywhere near as much value as they did right when they had no choice, right? People love to be like, oh, conference Wi-Fi is terrible, so I better close my laptop and talk to people.
Mm.
I mean, you can still do that today with good Wi-Fi, and keep your laptop open and talk to people. But uh, yeah, so I think that there's some amount of framing one's own experience in that sense, right? You have to a lot of the time you'll get into it what get out of it what you put into it, and then as far as the videos going online, um, that's kind of a big topic all on its own, which is right. What is the value of a conference talk video? Because it's a
That's
lot
the
more than
thing.
just um, it's a lot more than just like now we have on camera, someone did a talk.
That's the thing that I really want to dive into because it's this. I agree with you that I don't want to make it sound like virtual conferences aren't worth it. I definitely think they are, and I think that one they do things that perhaps when done properly are advantageous compared to in-person conferences. One, they're more accessible. If you're a single parent and a conference hasn't paid for childcare, or you don't necessarily want your child just running around at a conference playground with people that you don't know, like it makes it very very easy for you to kind of control the environment so that you can consume that event, however you feel is best for you. Same thing for having accessibility options. I know that conferences have done really great having things like stenographers and like ASL interpreters and that American Sign Language interpreters for the US. I don't know the other sign language interpreters in other countries. Uh, but these are things that can exist by default and can be done well when it's thought about, that makes virtual conferences better. And a lot of those things don't make their way to the video. Often you'll see things like automated transcriptions come in. You'll see things like, um, we'll let Google handle all of the text to speech stuff or ASL or things like that. And it's good that those things exist, but when you're in a technical space, stuff gets missed when you do that. Having done transcriptions, I fully understand how difficult it is to do that properly. But I think that there's already, for the average attendee, and I'm gonna look at this from the perspective of the average able-bodied. I would normally go to a conference, but I personally just don't feel like going to these right now because of the climate, budget, whatever. I feel like there's so much already taken away from virtual conferences, since considering they don't do open spaces, or the open spaces traditionally aren't casted or a part of that virtual experience. You can't just bump into somebody randomly in the hallway because there is no hall. You can check the Discord list or whatever chat window that you're in and see if there are other people that there, but that's kind of taking you away from that experience. So a conference that is focusing on the virtual side of things, and to be fair to Kiwi Pie, they were, but they weren't. They were also doing an in-person conference. I just know that virtual conferences have been top of mind. So like, when all you have is a virtual conference, or more than anything you have is a virtual conference, the videos, the talks themselves are like the thing. You know, people aren't paying to go to the Discord. They're not paying to go to the Slack room. They're not paying to go to the chat. They're paying to have access to the talks and maybe have them in real time. And if you're taking that and saying it's near real time and it's 24 hours out, I just don't see how it makes sense, even fiscally, to pay $200 for a virtual pass when you're taking out a big portion of that and saying, if I just wait 24 hours, I now get the biggest part of this for free.
Well, I think that I'm going to disagree on the premise that uh, that what you're primarily paying for is the video. Right. I think that, right, the sum, right, the whole of a conference is greater than the sum of its parts. And I also think that there are plenty of examples of people, paying with their time or money to be part of a community uh, that, right, does meet online, or doesn't have that particular um, deliverable of a talk video, right? So I, and if we broaden our view here outside of the scope of tech conferences, right? There are chat rooms that people pay for, right? Discord I think has actually made a pretty good business model out of, right, supporting these kind of uh, paid chat spaces for people who do Twitch streams or YouTube streams, things like that, where their communities can gather and discuss relevant topics within within their community. And if that all happens around, right, a Discord server or a Slack uh, server team rather, or some of the, right, IRC people spend tons and tons of time in IRC, and they're not necessarily paying with with their dollars to be uh, part of some of those chat rooms, but people do provide, right, support for tooling, right? If you're part of a programming language community like that, people will often have sort of like help channels and things like that. So um, it's I think it's basically the same discussion that we've always had about, should we put should we put videos up, as soon as we can. Um, because right, there is always some pushback on the front of, well, like that makes me less likely to buy a ticket. Um, and in the case of a an in-person event where a lot of the time you are limited by um, your physical space, right? At events that I've been a part of, um, we would typically sell out, somewhat close to the actual start of the event, and right, it wasn't just that, okay, well, we hit our target ticket number, right? That ticket number was basically as many people as we could fit in a room, and that's an additional area that um, that some of these virtual options really have an advantage um, over in-person events, right? Because you have more of an ability to include people who, right, couldn't attend for a variety of reasons, um, and you have, you know fewer marginal costs per ticket, right? So you're able to remove more of that barrier to entry of, right, well, I can't come because I can't afford this $200 ticket. uh, when you're doing an in-person event, and you have to actually cover, right, costs of, right, food and other consumables, and just the cost of renting out the space, there's a quite a bit there's quite a bit less headroom, so that when you say, okay, well, we'll offer discounted or free tickets, um, it's easier to do that when you have virtual options.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that, again, I think for a lot of folks, the virtual conference option is the I can't be there in person, so I will I don't want to say settle for this, but this gives me access to this where I really wanted to participate. I think what we have to do maybe as a community is stop assuming that the conference is designed for every single individual in the Python community to attend. I know we've had this conversation before of like, hey, some conferences are designed to be for the local community, and if you want to be a part of that, you have to be a part of that the way that it is designed with that community in mind first. Um, that being said, I want to ask you a little bit about the fact that conferences are back. Like, if New Zealand is doing conferences in person, like in person conferences are back. New Zealand won't let people in the country, but you can go to an in person event. Like, okay, cool. Um, Now that conferences are back in person, like what needs to be provided in the virtual events for it to make sense? Like, and I'm talking about for these dual, like, in person slash virtual. Like, what is enough value on the virtual side for that ticket to still be worth purchasing virtually?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot to discuss around that, and I think that there are a few kind of assumptions I'm going to make here, but before giving you an answer. One is that conferences are back is a pretty broad statement. Um,
I'm
I
doing the podcaster thing where I'm just speaking in generalizations and,
yeah.
and angering people so that they talk and they write comments and they subscribe and they go, I can't believe Jay said this.
uh, yeah. So Jay, conferences never went away. Some of them did virtual versions. Some of them went on hiatus. But but they didn't just evaporate, right? So we've got all of these events that are um, a lot of events, and we're a Python community show here, so I'm gonna uh, make this pretty Python conference and Python meetup centric. Um, a lot of these are used to meeting in person, right? It's just the way that most have done it, and that is by no means uh, uh, universally true. There are great events that have always happened online, um, but they what really we're starting to see is we've had 2 to 3 years of events trying to work on right, building out these virtual versions of events that used to be in person, but now uh, right, they've had uh, you know leading up to the first one potentially just a few months to plan, compared to right, building on right, years and maybe decades of experience running these sorts of in-person tech conferences. So a big part of it, I think, comes down to just time to get things right and to experiment. But yeah, in terms of what what conference organizers need to be doing, right? If they're going to offer something that they call a hybrid event, which is the word that everybody's throwing around, they really need to treat both aspects of that as um, critical to the thing as a whole. Um, and so that means not just doing a live stream and calling it virtual, right? If you're saying this is a community event, but you have no way for people attending from home to gather as a community, right? If that's your chat servers or um, other kind of remote, but still part of the conference events. So these open spaces that people can call into and other things like that. If it just comes down to an in-person event with a live stream, that's what it is. It's not a hybrid event, right? And as as we, I think a big important part of this is let's not drop the ball on all the people that have been able to participate in these events that hadn't in the past. Those uh, and especially don't don't put up an event and say, right, this is going to be uh, as inclusive remotely as it is in person. But then leave those attendees kind of high and dry.
I like that. I mean, it's the like don't treat your virtual conference as a stub onto like the actual thing. Make it a part of the thing. And I think that we're kind of in a holding pattern. Like a we'll see like what happens with the virtual offerings. I do think that they have improved. Obviously, with when all you can do is virtual, you want to make those as good as possible. And now that organizations are going back to in-person events, I think that what they realize is that you can do some of those things still and it not be too like financially disturbing. Honestly, sometimes it may not cost you very much more at all. So I think that will definitely have better virtual offerings. I'm just hope that that will continue. And speaking of offerings, our last topic before we do all the loose ends, I think the PyPI folks are offering more 2FA UB keys and things like that after they experience their first phishing scam. Like this
Yeah,
is this is a lot.
yeah. So we'll send out the link, but there was a tweet about um, uh, the first reports of a phishing campaign targeting project maintainers on PyPI. And so, right, there's a thread here. I encourage you to read it if you're interested in the details. But it looks something like, hey, you have to go here and verify your package, which took you to a phishing page where it was asking for right login credentials. Um, this was not a real PyPI website, and the PyPI maintainers, were notified of this by some members of the community. They took down malicious packages that were related to this phishing campaign. They suspended some accounts as a result of it. I believe accounts that were actually involved in the when I say involved, I mean that actually received right these phishing attacks. Um, and to your point about offering, they are extending the offering for hardware key 2FA tokens that they're giving away. So if you're a maintainer of a package that PyPI calls critical, then you are potentially eligible for a PyPI or a security key that you can use as a second factor authentication with PyPI. Um, so a lot of people were already eligible for this. They announced plans for enforcing two-factor authentication on some subset of projects about a month and a half ago. But previously, the eligible users excluded people who had 2FA set up already. Now it includes users who have 2FA set up through TOTP. So this is like your Google Authenticator or the app or those kinds of things. Um, and so right, this is one way you can protect yourself against phishing attacks. And if you're not already using a hardware token, highly recommend it. It's uh, 2FA, any 2FA is better than no 2FA. Hardware tokens are significantly more effective and less vulnerable to any kind of man in the middle attacks.
Yeah, the interesting thing here is I know that a lot of the stuff that we talk about or that we have talked about at least in this episode has been more focused on like I guess non-maintainers. These are people who are looking for jobs. These are people looking for who want to attend conferences and things like that. This is kind of the first one of like I have a thing that I'm trying to share with the world. And maybe it goes with the Heroku story a little bit. Like I have a product and I want to support this product. And I thought it was interesting that, not to call out one of the commenters, but one of the first comments you see there is like congratulations and it's like, huh, like Python is deemed important enough that like it's getting phishing attacks, and we've seen these. I think they're labeled as like supply chain attacks, basically. Like, oh, if I can't attack a Fortune 500 company and install ransomware and things like that, well, what I can do is I can attack the one of the packages that they rely on in their tool, like Instagram and some of these other products and stuff and things like that, like use Python on the back end for a lot of stuff. So if you can infiltrate through there, you not only get access to that big company, but you get access to everybody that's using that. And if you're installing malware on the people are just running it into their internal systems and hoping that it doesn't get caught. It's like, oh, someone just does pip update yada yada yada, and then now you've loaded a payload onto a critical piece of hardware. This is interesting. I feel like a lot of people are going to be like, this doesn't apply to me, but I assure you that I don't have a package that's in the top 1%, but I do have like Python packages that I've put on PyPI, mostly as a learning exercise. I'm like, hey, this is how you would do this. And I think that offering for the top 1%. Obviously they have to put a line somewhere. They can't buy everybody a YubiKey. But is there anything that you think PyPI could be doing other than this to extend that security to the other 99% of packages out there?
I mean, I think the PyPI folks are doing a fantastic job. If you follow the thread there, they have right they took pretty quick action to take down packages that were affected here, and yeah, this whole initiative of requiring two-factor authentication for package maintainers is uh, you know going to make the uh, co- the ecosystem around Python packages and uh, maintenance and installation of them more secure across the board, right? And right, you start with right the things that are going to affect the most people, right, the most downloaded packages, and you work your way out from there. And um, to add some additional context here, right? This isn't like, okay, well, we've deemed you to be in this group of people who get access to 2FA, right? That's not what's happening here. Two-factor authentication has been supported on PyPI for a while now, and one, if you have your own YubiKey already, or if you have right uh, an app installed like right Google Authenticator or a lot of password managers support TOTP as a two-factor authentication.
I don't know if the the last pass event is something that we'll cover here, but I mean, obviously, you're talking about the
Yeah,
TOTP type authenticators. Got it.
yeah. So these software versions or hardware keys, if you already have them too, uh, have been supported on PyPI for quite some time. So if you're not uh, already using two-factor authentication on your PyPI account, you should go set that up.
Mm.
Because there are free options out there, right? Like these TOTP apps, um, and two, if you do have um, if you do have a package in that group, right, in that group of critical dependencies, then yeah, go get yourself a hardware security key through this PyPI giveaway, um, because right, it's a better method of two-factor authentication by some measures that than TOTP is. But any 2FA is better than no 2FA. And yeah, I mean, people who are involved in building out these dependencies that we use in our Python applications are going to be the targets of these kinds of attacks. And so uh, it's important to make sure that uh, that we um, don't let some malicious third party gain access to important distributions um, through a password breach, for example.
So before we wrap up and get to the kind of the lightning round, what can the actual end users of these packages do to, I guess, keep themselves in the know, keep themselves safe, keep themselves protected? I feel like telling people to pin their versions is not the answer, but I don't know. I don't really know what the answer is to this one, honestly.
I mean, that is an answer. It's an answer for a bunch of reasons, including security. There's version pinning. There's hash checking mode in pip. Um, uh, there's also you brought this up pretty recently, but there's a tool called pip audit that I think is pretty relevant here.
Mm.
Um, at the end of the day, um, there's no one step to make sure, okay, all of the software is 100% safe. Because if that existed, someone would have just done it.
Yeah.
Right. But yeah, again, props to the PyPI team here for doing this kind of work, both responding to phishing attacks, and if you've gotten a phishing email, Jay, and it's telling you, hey, go here, enter your PyPI credentials, forward that along to security@pypi.org. Make sure that the people maintaining this resource and keeping it safe know about it. Um, and uh, that uh, I'm super glad that they're watching out for the community at large.
Definitely. And again, we're two people on a with microphones and internet access. Like we're asking questions because we want to know, and if you know, like please let us know in the comments, or just reach out to us on Twitter and things like that. But we're while we can talk about a lot of these things that are happening, we do it with the like utmost hug ops for like everybody that gets impacted by this stuff that happens. Like it takes so much like outside of what your normal responsibilities are to then deal with the fact that okay, hey, something super important, took down a service or took down something, and then now we have to go through the audit process, we have to go through the remediation process and do all those things. So yeah, if you're listening and like this was you got one of those emails, or like or you almost fell for it, like we are in no way criticizing or poking fun at or anything like that. It's our hearts definitely go out to you, and like we hope that you can have a safe Python experience, and as much as you want your users to as well.
Jay, I think you wanted to wrap up with some conference related things.
You mean the conference lightning round? I think we can do that. Let's round robin some of these and start with PyBay. PyBay's food truck edition is happening in just a couple of weeks. You still have time to go grab a ticket there. I want to say tickets are $200. It's in the San Francisco area if that's where you live or you work or you operate out of. So be sure to go check that out. What about, I'm gonna move this over. What about PyCon APAC?
Yeah, that's coming up in just about a week now. I was gonna say a week from tomorrow, but I think time zones mean it's a week from now. But yeah, their conference is coming up. If you are if you are in the area, certainly check that out.
Yeah, and then we have PyCon Ghana, which is happening later in October. I've been seeing a lot of reach on there. Shout out to the folks, one in Ghana that are putting this together. It's their first time back in 3 years, which is amazing. A lot of conferences have struggled to kind of get back up and running, so it's good to see more and more of the international conferences. We often see things from like the U.S. lens, so it's kind of good to see them all up and running. And then I think we have one more.
Yeah, Jay, you have a conference talk coming up.
I mean, yeah, I mean, I'm speaking, but also you should go because it's going to be a fun time in San Diego. So yeah,
Or
DjangoCon
remote.
or remote and remote. I think that there have been very public discussions with the DjangoCon organizers about how they're trying to make the remote experience uh, equally as great as the in-person one as much as possible, doing all the right things, having all the right conversations. And yeah, I'm giving one of the keynote presentations on the second day where I will talk about the Python community and how it's for better or worse like your trip to the public pool.
All right, I
So I
think
think that
that's all the conferences on our docket for this week.
Yeah, and that's actually a good point. If you have a conference or a CFP announcement that you want shared, you want on the show, we're doing this every Friday at 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern. I believe that's the time. As long as time zones and things continue to operate the way they do. Uh, yeah, if you have a topic that you want us to talk about, you want us to cover, if you have a CFP announcement that you want us to do, or if your conference is coming up and you just want to maybe have a few more people find out about it, head over to the GitHub repo and file an issue. That, one of the greatest things that we've done here is we've created a template so that anybody can go to the website, create an issue, and then ultimately we can go through and figure out what we want to prepare for the show. And you can also see a little bit of Python in action, mostly John doing all the work and me figuring out how date times work. But I think that's going to wrap it up. If you've been watching with us live, thank you so much. If you want to watch live, you can do so one of two ways. You can do it on Twitch at twitch.tv/KJAY or on YouTube, youtube.com, and then /C/KJY Miller. Our hope is that enough people will start watching live. We'll move this over to its own channel and grow this as much as possible. If you're watching a little bit later on the VOD or on a podcast or listening on a podcast feed, let us know what you thought. You can do so on Twitter. My Twitter is KJAY Miller. John, what about you?
Mine is Jonafato. It's just take my first part of my first name and the last part of my last name and smash them together. And yeah, with that, until this time next week.
Yeah, you've been listening to the Python Community News.